It's great to it's great to be here. I love these events. They remind me that as steep as this challenge is, no one's facing it alone. We're all facing it together, and we're mostly all facing it together because Shirley Malcolm somehow connects us all. But exactly, yes, exactly. So what we've got a great chance to have a conversation here for about 30 minutes that I think is appropriately a very scientific conversation about bringing greater equity to science, which is that, if science is committed to any idea, it's that the more we understand the world around us, the better we're able to shape that world to serve our interests and our commitments. And so the conversation we're going to have today is about data and the importance of connecting what we know to opportunities for change. I'm really delighted to be joined by Madeline Donono, the president and CEO of the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media, Nicole Austin, who you already, the Vice President of Marketing, Communications and Government Affairs for the National Math and Science Initiative, and then, of course, Shirley as well. And each one of them has some new information to share with us. So we're going to kind of put that on the table first, and then have a bit of a conversation about how to connect that information to our work moving forward. So, Madeline, why don't we start with you? You've been doing some research on the impact of media on perceptions of these issues, and it would be great if you could give us a bit of a sneak peek of what you're learning.
So how many of you have heard of the Gina Davis Institute? For context?
Wow, look at that.
Fabulous. This is fabulous. So we also want to thank, Lyda Hill and Nicole Small and Matt and Chris and everything, because without their support, we wouldn't be able to continue this work. And just to give you some context, we've always looked at how storytelling can impact all kinds of issues, social impact, social justice issues. And it wasn't until President Obama back in 2008 made a statement about how the United States, we were going to fall behind in terms of science and technology because our children, and particularly when you look at girls, most of the programs at that time were focusing on high school girls. And then we realized that girls in middle school were falling out. And we've always studied who is showing up and how are they showing up? Do they have a job? Are they wearing clothes? Little things like that in media. And because what happens in the make-believe has real world impact. We hadn't thought about this thing called STEM, which we had to look up because we didn't know what that meant back then. And that's how we started the work. And we were just absolutely blessed that Nicole and Lyda or Gina speak in Dallas many, many years ago and made the connection because they're such big thinkers and they understood media effects. That's how the ball got going. And now we're really thrilled that we're going to be presenting our next version of that report. So it's kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. When you think about 81% of Americans are exposed to some type of science in the shows that they're watching, but it's a 2-to-1 ratio of make-believe male STEM characters to female characters. And 71% of the women and girls that we surveyed recently said, we think it's really important. And guess what? 62% of them enjoy seeing STEM characters. In fact, Mission Unstoppable is a perfect example of that. 800,000 people are watching that show every Saturday morning. It's in its 5th season. It's the only and most successful STEM show in TV history. And so, with that, on the flip side of that, although 71% say it's important, 62%, I want to see it, over 40% of them said, but I know I'm going to face sexism if I pursue this career. Now, where are they getting that from? Well, media is reinforcing this negative stereotype. It's not cool. They don't think it's cool to be a civil engineer or a mathematician. And 60 to 80% of them say, well, we see a lot of doctors, but we're not seeing mathematicians, we're not seeing computer scientists. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, but just to give you, a sense of what we're finding and what some of the issues are that we hope to work on.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I had the same reaction when I watched Breaking Bad. I said, look, women can cook meth too. What is it with this? No. Cole, let's go to you. You guys are collecting some really unique data on teachers and the way in which teachers think about their ability to teach STEM, often facing very different resource constraints. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're learning?
Yeah, so the National Math and Science Initiative, we are a STEM solution provider, and we have partnered with school districts and states across 48 different states in the United States. And since 2007, we have impacted 1,800 high schools, 6,800 teachers in high school, middle school, and elementary school, and 2.7 million students. And what we have found is that we really need to have educators, both male and female, who understand how to encourage our girls. So we're really proud to have partnered with Lyda Hill Foundation as well as 3M to provide teachers with resources in the classroom. We've partnered with Lyda Hill to provide discussion guides on each of their if-then ambassadors, which really helps any teacher in the classroom show a female student what she can be in the STEM field. And then we also partnered with 3M to work with them on discussion guides for their documentary called Not the Science Type. So we provided both watch parties for students and for teachers, and we've also provided those discussion guides. So we are really passionate about not only making sure that our diverse students and teachers have materials, but that we also talk about gender equity within STEM. And as far as our results, we are really proud to talk about the fact that in 22-23, our total teacher population was about 1,800 teachers. We have over 35% of those teachers who were teachers of color, 53% who were female teachers as well. So we are really striving to make sure that the teachers that we are training not only have the tools regardless of their gender, but also that we are reaching diverse teachers and building community, as well as giving them the content and pedagogy in STEM so that they can take that back to their classrooms.
Great, thank you. And Shirley, we've heard a lot about if-then, and it seems like now we've begun to evaluate the program, and it would be great to hear some of what we're learning about how this program actually impacts students.
You're absolutely right, and Nicole gave you a preview of actually some of the reach which we could not have imagined. I mean, that is, I'll just start that we could not have imagined. I want to just kind of tell you a little bit about how we got into this business in the first place, and then direct you to our impact, to printed copies of our impact report that you can look at, because it's really a kind of quite amazing story. When Nicole and Matt showed up in our offices at AAAS headquarters and said, you know, we know that this is a challenge. We know that this is a problem. Have you thought about, can we think about how we might attack this particular problem? And we had seen very good outcomes with another quote-unquote ambassador program that we had run. But in this particular case, we recognized that this was going to have to be different, that this was going to have to include people at many different levels, young people, people who are come from every field, from every part of the country, from everything, because we were trying to tell a story to young women about the opportunity. There's that word again, the opportunity that was there for them within the STEM fields. And so we stood up a project to initially identify 40 people, and the number kept growing and growing, and it got up to 120, and I said, oh, we can do this. And the amazing thing is that we found some absolutely amazing, amazing women. And if you look at the impact report, what you will find is that they themselves benefited. They gained more confidence. They gained skills, and they are still talking about the summit, the initial summit, like 90% of them said, this was the thing that really stuck for me. I got the skills I need in order to be a better role model, in order to get out there and meet and mingle with people. This was a major outcome. Another major outcome for them was that they formed a network. They met other people like them who were deeply committed to representing, to being this face, the face of science or engineering out there in the public. And and yet another aspect of it that I think that really benefits, some even talked about the impact that it had on their careers. Our If Then ambassadors include people from everywhere with almost every possible identity and geographic area that you can possibly imagine. And I think that that is really one of the great powers of the If Then ambassador program, to real people who can talk to real girls and young women and inspire them and help them understand this is something that they can do and it's something they can be. I will say that the If Then ambassador, the statues program was absolutely inspired because it, in fact, gave them an opportunity to not only represent as a quote unquote statue, but to basically be there as a person. And it was that kind of interaction that they also talked about, being able to talk to girls and young women and to their parents and guardians and to other adults in their lives, because that's another part. Oftentimes, when girls want to say they want to do something that is kind of off the beaten track or quote unquote non-traditional, the parents will get a little, I don't know, because you might face sexism. The parents might, in fact, make those kinds of comments. And this was an opportunity for them to counter those comments right there on the spot. And so this has had an absolutely profound impact that extended beyond the kind of hands-on work and the additional support that Lyda Hill Philanthropies gave to enable them to have the kind of community or other kinds of activities that they would take on, in some cases forming teams of things that they wanted to do together. So it has had an impact at the individual level. It has had impact at the community level. And I think that it has had impact at the national level because of the dialogue and the narrative that it generated when it was on the National Mall. That generated a lot of attention. That generated huge attention. And even to the extent of where our CEO went down with his daughter. This is the kind of thing that you need. You've got to gin up all of this. That plus the kinds of impressions that you find online, plus the face-to-face encounters, that's what makes a difference. And we see all of these things, and I would encourage you to pick up a copy of the Impact Report, and you can learn a lot more about what has been going on.
Great, thank you. I guess we have a few minutes to have a bit of a discussion about what you all are learning from these experiences. And the first thing that strikes me listening to each of you is that science isn't just a set of disciplines, it's a story about discovery. And the question is, can everyone see themselves in that story? And so I'd love to ask each of you to reflect a little bit on, in the domain where you work, what are we getting wrong about the story, and then what's the story we should be telling? And maybe we can start with you, Nicole. Like, most people's first experience of that story is in a classroom. Like, it's either explicit and express or it's tacit. Then we can kind of move to Shirley and sort of think of like an embodied story, and then really to hear about the cultural touchstones that are television programs and film. But Nicole, why don't we start with you? Like, what's the story being told in the classroom, and how does it need to change?
Well, from my perspective, Sam, it's interesting that you asked that question, because I have a degree in computer systems engineering. And I always like to say that I used that for about 5 minutes. And then I went to graduate school and I focused in on marketing technology. And I spent the last 20 years working in technology firms. And I'll have to say that I didn't always identify myself as a woman in STEM. But as I was transitioning my career from the private sector to the nonprofit sector, I worked with a coach and she said, "You are a woman in STEM. Even though you're working in marketing in technology firms. You have an engineering degree. Don't sell yourself short." So I think as our world starts evolving, and for those of you, I have a 14-year-old son. So for those of you who have children or grandchildren of that age, you know that everything is about technology and STEM. And I think we have to broaden the perspective around telling children what they can be in STEM, because almost everything is STEM or STEM adjacent. As Dr. Harris likes to say, 10 out of the 10 future jobs will be STEM or STEM adjacent. And we have to start incorporating that in all of the discussions that we talk about with our children in terms of their career paths. I had parents who understood that STEM was a great way to go. Now, the reason they understood it was a great way to go is because I had really expensive taste, Shirley. And my father said, "You may not get married right away, so you better get a career where you can make some money." And so that's what drove me. But for the other children, we just need to make sure that whether you are focusing on art, whether you're focusing on writing, whether you're focusing on whatever it is, you're going to be touching STEM, and the skill sets that you will learn by being involved in a STEM career will take you quite literally to the moon and back if you so desire.
And Shirley, so when you see young people interacting with If Then, either through the statues themselves or through the associated materials or even through the social media engagement, what are some of the stories people are bringing to the encounter, and what are the stories they're leaving with? Like, how is this changing their story?
I think that the thing that is really most important for me is that young people start to believe, well, if she did it, then that means I should be able to do it too. Yes, that's exactly what it means. But I think that one of the most important things is when there are adults around listening to these conversations. First of all, in some cases, that's the first time a parent has ever heard about this interest. And it is basically also the first time that they have thought that, okay, maybe I need to support this interest. I am of a different generation. When I went into science, the idea of a woman going into science was not an idea. I mean, that's how long ago it was. But I remember my grandmother saying to me that if I went into STEM and stayed in school as long as I did, I might not be able to find a husband. Okay. I think that it is important that people understand that we are authentic people with full lives. I have children, 2 girls. They have children. I have the grandchildren basically need to be reassured that all people can go into STEM, and that's okay. And I think that in many cases, we are thought of as being a little bit outside of the norm. For women of color, there are cultural expectations that are often on us, and people need to understand we fulfill those cultural expectations. I can fix sweet potato pie.
I know that.
And that, in fact, much better than pumpkin. But in fact, it is this notion of it does not set you outside by making this choice. What it does is it gives you powerful skills to solve the world's problems. And I think that so many girls go into whatever thinking that they want to solve problems. And that is important to really underscore. that you do not work by yourself. You do not, you work in teams, you work together, and you take on big challenges, and you can be fulfilled in that work. And I think that those are important messages.
And Madeline, as you all work with the companies and the institutions that really are a true cultural touchstone that reflect back to us who we are, and as your data shows so clearly that the world being reflected back to us is one where very few people are doing science and are scientists, how are you beginning to talk to studios and content publishers and directors and producers about what a different story needs to look like?
Well, it is about rewriting the narrative, and I'll just tell you a story. So when Lyda and Nicole and Matt, we had the first study that we were presenting, we took it directly to the Writers Guild because you can reinvent the world with keystroke. So we're standing around chatting with a bunch of very powerful TV showrunners. And they said, well, where's the scientist? And they didn't realize that Jess Cramp, who tagged sharks in the Cook Islands, who's a drop-dead gorgeous blonde, and Raywyn Grant, who is a large carnivore expert who has her own TV show, who's a drop-dead gorgeous African-American woman, were standing right there. And they didn't understand that you don't have to have glasses and a lab coat and be in the dark and alone to be a science. If there's a forest, you can be in STEM. You can tell a STEM story. If there's an ocean, you can tell a STEM story. And they were blown away. And that was before we even presented the data. So it's really about rewriting the narrative. And what's good is since we've done this work, we have been able to measure that, yes, we're seeing more make-believe female scientists on TV. Too many in the life sciences, not enough in mathematics, computer science, and engineering. And for women of color, we've seen some very big jumps in terms of the make-believe. So we can track that we're making progress, but we just still have a long way to go. So it's just reimagining your definition of what does a scientist look like.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. What I want to, I think one of the really exciting things that has been part of the STEM Opportunity Alliance since its inception is this idea that we build a strategy together. Not that all the work has to be shared, but that all the work works together in order to achieve the goal of an equitable STEM ecosystem. And so we're in this moment where AAAS is leading this phenomenal process to get ideas and views from around the country, from around sectors. So you've got a captive audience that really sees itself in the construction of that strategy. I'd sort of love to hear from each of you, what's an idea, an issue, an opportunity, something you want this audience thinking about as we begin to put the finishing touches on the strategy itself, and then as we begin to think about taking that strategy forward in the world. And maybe, Madeline, we could speak with you. Like, what's something that you want to make sure we're all thinking about as we think about what a successful national strategy includes or does?
Clearly, there's a lot of work streams, and it takes all those work streams. But what's really important that somewhere in this 5-year strategic plan, the power of storytelling to influence change is baked into it. And right now, from what I know, it's not. There's nothing about media, nothing about storytelling, nothing about the power of Hollywood in this plan. And that is something that I'm pleading to make sure, because it could manifest as simply as the very same high schools and colleges that are teaching script writing and media studies. I mean, it has to be baked into it in terms of narrative, counter-narratives, countering stereotypes. I mean, there's so many different ways to approach it so that the next generation of content creators, it's like breathing water. Of course, yes, there could be a female civil engineer, and she could be a person of color, and she could be a disabled person, and all kinds of things in one character. I would just want to make sure that it's in that plan somewhere.
And just a quick follow-up, what advice would you give the community of advocates who are here or who are watching, at their desks, for what their ask of Hollywood should be? As someone who understands that industry, what is it that we should demand of the people who are making film and TV in these stories that play such a powerful role in our culture.
You know, our tagline has always been, if she can see it, she can be it, and just demand more female STEM characters and more diversity within STEM, and to just rewrite, you know, the narrative. And it's very, very easy to do, and just to think more broadly about how you think about what a scientist, you know, looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you. Nicole, how about you? What's something we should all be that you would have us all think about as we bring this strategy?
So one thing I want us all to think about as we bring the strategy forward is really the support for the teacher. And that's not just the teacher in K through 12, but also the teachers within higher education. We need to be able to provide the right supports to the people who spend so much of their day with our children, right? Whether it's culturally responsive materials, whether it's bringing in ambassadors from Then to show girls that they can be wonderful STEM supporters and STEM professionals. We need to make sure that we are collectively supporting this profession, because as I believe, as this profession goes, so goes our nation, because that's who's teaching our kids. So we need to advocate for STEM materials, excellent content and pedagogy, making sure that teachers are paid well, making sure that teachers have opportunity to rest, and make sure they have opportunities to grow, and help them navigate some of the biases and things that they may have that trickle down from their own experiences into the classroom. So I want us to really think about that, and growing that diverse teacher pipeline and supporting those diverse teachers is going to be so important in our country, because over 50% of our nation's school children today are diverse school children. And every study that we see from K through 12 on through higher education shows that if a child has a diverse teacher, they're more likely to go to college, they're more likely to pursue STEM, they're more likely to graduate from college. That data is irrefutable, and we need to make sure that as we move this strategy forward, that we're supporting the very people who are helping our children get to that next level in STEM.
Let me just a quick follow-up for you too. You mentioned the issue of teacher pay. I was reminded. I remember it for one of the State of the Union addresses during his presidency. Barack Obama said, and in Korea they call teachers nation builders, and like some of my friends were like, I was overwhelmed when I was just an algebra teacher. Now I'm a nation builder. What is there one thing you want this audience to be, or what's something about teachers and the profession of teaching in America today that we need to keep in mind if we're going to be able to heed your exhortation, really support teachers in schools? What's just something we as an audience need to know?
So one of the things that we really love about our program at the National Math and Science Initiative is the community support that we provide to teachers. And we provide that in a variety of ways. We provide it through our teacher villages. We also provide it obviously through our professional development opportunities. But when you speak to some of these teachers, diverse teachers, female teachers in STEM, they are often the only teacher of color or the only female teacher on the science wing in the school. They don't have anyone else to speak to. So I want us to also think about the community that we can build. Community for some racial groups and ethnicities is a core tenet of their culture. And we gotta build it into our schools, right? They need rest, they need support. They need to be able to rejuvenate themselves. But community is one thing that we provide very strongly with our coaches, who can be called on demand by a teacher who's in the classroom. And also they have communities where they can then exchange ideas amongst each other and get ideas just in time to solve classroom issues.
Thank you. Shirley, well, how about you? What's one thing you want us all thinking about as we develop and implement this strategy?
I have 3.
2.5.
Okay. We're going to have a tendency to want to count heads in terms of measuring our progress. And that's part of what we have to count. But I think we have to count women's advancement into leadership roles. And people of color's advancement to leadership roles, because that's where we start looking at the issue of power and who can shape things and the design and the advancement, that we're going to have to start focusing on that as well. I think we're going to also have to focus on the environment in which this work is being done, and that includes the policy environment. And I know nobody really wants to wade into that, but I will just leave it on the table. And I think that we need to keep a systems focus. The change that we seek has to really be across the system. Nicole's teachers have to basically feel the love and feel supported in order to do what they have to do, and they then be handed off to faculty who are able to support belonging and identity with as scientists or engineers for the people that they then pick up and on through the workforce. And I do support totally this notion of we've got to do better in storytelling. And because that is what really what grabs people. And I think that that's an absolutely critical part.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up about the political environment. I think we're certainly in an environment where I know many people, it's easy to feel nationally that every issue turns on who's in the White House, but we're in a state where our hosts are getting incredible work done. So what might you say, not about the national political environment, but for those of us who are working in all kinds of different local and regional contexts where you've got Republicans and Democrats, sometimes working together, sometimes working against each other, what are just the elements of a policy environment that's going to have more success on this issue? What are irrespective of party, what needs to be present in a policy environment to make progress?
What needs to be present is the realization that we will only get there together. That the needs that we have for building a workforce go beyond partisan, they go beyond local, they are local, they're often very local, and that they are state and they are federal as well. But the idea that we will only get there together is, I think, a really important idea. Cross-sector, I don't care where the state is. You cannot shut down the air in New York State. You've got to deal with whatever is there. You've got to deal with the health disparities that may be there. You've got to deal with the quality of education that is there. And I think that that is what I am hoping, that we can come out with a voice that unifies, even in a space that may be divisive, because what we want is excellence for all. And that is, I think, the focus that I want us to take.
Please join me in thanking our panelists. That was tremendous. Thank you so much.